If I told you that you could get brilliant games for sometimes as cheap as 90% off every single day, would you believe me? Well, stay until the end of this video to find out how with chrono.gg/caddy.
Greetings and salutations, my beautiful people. I'm Caddicarus, and aren't video games wonderful? Yeah, games rock. Games are cool. Games are way much better than school.
Caddy does not condone the actions of cancelling your education because you need an education to play games in the first place, you fucking idiot.
And how about those boss battles, eh? Aren't they grand? Except when they're being a load of fucking shit. They aren't in every game ever made, but whenever they are included, they can be some of the most standout and memorable parts of the game. They test your knowledge and what you've learned in your entire journey up to that point, and they can even have puzzle elements in them. But overall, they really should be climactic and intimidating, and give you a massive power trip whenever you conquer them. Except for these 10 following boss battles that can all just flip off.
To start off this list in no particular order at all, and of course with all you remembering that this is all my personal opinion on my own video, okay? Let's talk about a game that I actually managed to finish recently, Assassin's Creed 2. Say what you want about the main chunk of the game, I personally found it overall just okay, but at a random point in the story after the revenge plot has already kind of concluded, here comes Mr. Who actually gives a shit to wreck up your fun time and leave absolutely no impact or impression on you at all. All of a sudden this guy is now your main target, no matter how little threatening build-up and presence he actually has, and just lingers like bad breath for the rest of the game. So the least you can ask for in that situation is a half-decent ending boss battle if he has to stick around.
You don't get that.
How about instead you finish the game punching a fat guy? Is that not what you wanted? Oh, sorry. Well, that's what you get. A piss-poor fist fight and a long, drawn-out conversation with more exposition than the Book of Genesis. I don't care who this guy is, I don't care what he's about to do, I just want to kill him and get it over with, but no, you're stuck punching him in the face before he escapes. Great final encounter, Ubisoft. And how about the bosses that clearly just have no thought or care put into them at all, like in, oh, I don't know, random pick in the everybody's gonna hate me for criticizing it pile, or Super Mario 3D World. Mechanically great and amazing in presentation, but that's kind of it in my opinion. You can say all you want about how great of a game this is, but one thing that you definitely can't argue because it's fact is that the same bosses are reused constantly. And on a first try around, they aren't that amazing. Some would even say too easy for a few of them, even if they are very damn fun. But to then get them reused over and over again? What? I mean, the Order 1886 had nothing but QuickTime bosses, but at least they didn't go down that lazy of a road and reuse the same boss. Oh wait, they totally did, and people hated it for doing that, like they should. This is padding and soulless bullshit unlike anything else I can think of, and the constant rehashing of them only serves to highlight that Nintendo probably ran out of ideas and how unspecial the bosses are in the first place. I mean, God knows why Nintendo thought they were that good to just have to be used again, sometimes up to 3 times. Especially considering this is the king of innovation and creativity, Nintendo, I mean, how would you feel if you flushed the toilet only to then have your breakfast resurface straight away, meaning you had to flush it again? Because that's what Super Mario 3D World felt like with the bosses. That was a terrible analogy, I apologize. And hey, while we're on the hate train of putting full games on this list for the lackluster bosses, look no further than the original Spyro the Dragon on PS1. I love this game and the series, but enough about my strange fetish of thick plastic jewel cases. How are these bosses exactly? Terrible, all of them, and I have no idea why nobody seems to dislike them as much as I do whenever Spyro comes up into discussion, which is like all the time for me, especially when I'm in the club. Every boss level in Spyro 1, including the final boss, basically plays like a tiny and very linear version of every other level in the game, except with the least interesting level designs and with the most unthreatening and forgettable bosses themselves, which are destroyed as fast as they're introduced. There's just nothing to them. They don't dominate their own levels, let alone the worlds that they're in. They have no interesting attacks or mechanics to work around, and they're just, well, I'm getting bored just talking about them, so let's move on, please.
Oh god, no, move back! Wide load reversing!
For those of you who have no idea what this is, I envy you. But if you do want to know, it's called The Bed of Chaos, and it's a seeping ugly blemish on one of my favorite games I've ever played in my life, Dark Souls. This nasty sack is the result of what happened in the lore of the world of Dark Souls, when one of the most powerful beings of the past, known as the Witch of Izalith, helped Lord Gwyn defeat the great everlasting dragons with pyromancy, and helped keep alive a very special flame keeping the world alive, Gwyn in power, and life in balance. The first flame, that was slowly dwindling as the years went on. In a desperate attempt to rekindle this flame, she tried in vain but ultimately failed to recreate it with fire magic, and it backfired majorly, mutating most of her family into twisted demonic monsters and eventually consuming the witch herself, as she now lay trapped within the belly of this massive fleshy growths, unable to do anything but birth demons and create chaos for anyone unlucky enough to find it. Now, for such an epic backstory, how's the boss battle? Well, how about we make it a platforming boss that involves you jumping around a lot and using footwork to get around this thing bigger than a country, even though you can't jump properly in this action RPG that never focuses on jumping in platforms in the first place, and fill the stage with one-hit kill holes that these long unavoidable arms can drag you into randomly, and all the boss will be is hitting two things before heading to the middle and hitting a slug. Okay then, don't worry, how about we play something kick-ass, Mortal Kombat 9? This game is a masterful fighter, one of my favourite fighters ever made, and one thing I was always looking forward to is how bigger baddies or even boss fights would be handled. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that they fell asleep at the wheel and crashed. I mean, what, Shao Kahn? What? Talk about playing through an epic campaign mode that's constantly ramping up difficulty and testing your skills for the new fighting mechanics, special attack meter, and tag teaming combos, only to then just drop everything at the final encounter. Fuck this guy. Extremely fast, never slowing down, no cooldown even when taunting you, blocking most of your attacks and special X-ray attacks that you throw at him, spamming the most ridiculously overpowered moves over and over and over again with reckless abandon, and as far as I can tell, there is no reason for any of it. I get he's supposed to be the final boss, but fuck off. This guy is way too cheap. I'm convinced he's nearly impossible without playing it as cheap and as tacky as he does, and that absolutely ruins the ending for me. I remember beating this arse hat with a hat on his arse, and when I say that I mean a hat on his face, but his face is an arse, by constantly flipping backwards, jumping forwards in the milliseconds I had to do it, and then uppercutting. And then there are people like this guy, Fluffy for the win, who used this method over and over again until he died. No change in tactic. It feels like the only fair way to properly beat him. Be a cheap bitch as much as him. I'm sure he's possible if you play against him properly, but if I could get through the entire campaign with a challenge or two here and there, but always with me fairly overcoming it and feeling satisfied, only to then jump the difficulty up so much that the very last minute I have no choice but to play like your irritating sister who just rams buttons whenever she wants to and somehow always wins, I consider it a shit fight. Shao Kahn. More like Shao Kahn. And such is the way of life, from the most unfair and difficult of bosses to the absolute lowest and biggest laughing stocks of bosses. Silver the Hedgehog from Sonic 06 is one of the most classic examples of how not to do anything in a video game ever. Just look at this, it's pathetic. You'd never even know you were in a boss fight. The camera is so broken you can never focus on where you need to, you can be frozen in midair and hit whenever the game feels like it with no chance to avoid it, Sonic vanishes whenever he gets hit, and for Silver himself, he never changes his pitiful attacks of throwing stuff at you, can be beaten in around a minute if not less, and if you're really lucky, you'll be stuck over and over and over again listening to the greatest line in any video game because it makes no sense, means nothing, has no context, and is spoken like the voice actor couldn't hold in his wee-wee anymore and just let loose in his pants.
It's no use! It's no use! It's no use!
This boss though may be bad, but to be honest, it's just a nugget. A nugget of sweet corn in a poo at the bottom of a barrel within a basement of a giant poo factory. And the giant poo factory is named Sonic 06.
It's no use!
Oh, and how about the bosses that only culminate to pressing a few button prompts? I'm looking at you, Dying Light. Overall, a pretty damn good game in my opinion, but talk about one of the worst villains for this generation of games ever. Stereotypical and as hilariously bland and cliched as they come, so much that I won't even bother mentioning his name, he doesn't deserve it. But like Mr. Who Actually Gives a Shit from Assassin's Creed 2, someone who at least needs to give you a great final encounter to test your knowledge and courage, especially seeing as though you need to climb a fucking skyscraper to reach him. And after all of this, does he deliver? Nope. Does he fuck? The last moments of this puke brain's life meant so little to the dev team that it's delegated to a couple of button prompts. Button prompts that if you get wrong just mean you have to redo the long, tedious, boring, and ultimately time-wasting cutscene over and over again until you get it right. Like, I actually want to know, how did the people that make this actually think this was good? How did the team think it was acceptable for a game that was released this recently? This is just embarrassing, and especially since the plot of Dying Light drags on for the last half as it is anyway, a boss this lazy and this uncompassionate not only makes you feel pretty damn terrible for wasting your time getting this far, but also confirms exactly that the dev team also didn't give a fuck for your invested time or money into their project that they sold you, or that they give a fuck about their own created characters in this supposedly soul-driven world that they made for the sake of the video game art form. In that sense, it's one of the most depressing bosses ever, actually.
Perhaps looking at it too deeply.
While on the subject of QuickTime, how about instead we move over to something a lot simpler to grasp and simpler to love, Uncharted, with its rapid escapes and luscious environments, quick-fire gunfights, and Tomb Raider-esque puzzles and platforming. Okay, yes, the first game has dated by quite a while now, especially when compared to its follow-ups, but I'd still recommend a play at this if you want to get into the series. It's not essential, but a decent introduction to Nate Drake and crew. Now for some wordplay. What's the opposite of introduction? Conclusion. And does Uncharted have a great conclusion? No, it's yet another boss battle that doesn't test your knowledge, isn't fun, is over within a minute, and with a character who I can't even remember the name of, he's so badly integrated into the plot. His name is Navarro, I think, like Fallout 2? And he's a henchman to another bad guy who is also one of the most forgettable characters in the history of video games, but then turns out to not be the main bad guy after all once this Johnny appears and tries to be scary and give you a twist ending, but it's just so poorly done. And how do you fight this boss exactly? Well, unlike any other part of the game ever until this point, it begins with lots of cover shootouts where you have to stay down whenever the laser sights appear, and you can't actually hit the fucking guy you're supposed to be aiming at and who's trying to kill you directly. So yeah, that makes sense initially. You keep going through these bits until the final fight, in which you have to immediately duck or else die straight away. And if not, hide and wait for every 2 bullets fired at you before you run to the next available cover. And no matter how long it takes for him to reload his gun, you can't rush at him or he'll kill you. Then you run at him after 3 cover points and punch him in the face with more QuickTime prompts, lose your gun, and then without any indication that the cutscene is going to quickly change into gameplay again, you then need to run towards him again or else die in 1 hit again. But if you do that successfully, you do more QuickTime events and finish him off. I mean, stick my bloody fingers down the sink. This is forgettable, pointless, not satisfying, doesn't test you on anything that you learn, is totally different with no explanation, is boring, is completely random and impossible to get on your first ever attempt if you don't know what's coming up, over in a minute, and overall makes no sense at all from concept and execution. Maybe if we go back to my favorite console ever, the PS1, and also with another game by Naughty Dog, that's weird, everything will end a little bit nicer. So let's take a look at what many consider to be one of the best games on the system, Crash Bandicoot 2. I'm always gonna love 3 more for many reasons, and one of those reasons are the boss fights, which when you're talking about Crash 2 aren't the worst I've ever played, but honestly just aren't that exciting and pretty easy. You'd think though, especially since Crash 1 ended with the best boss battle that the game had to offer, that Cortex would at least be worth your massive journey. And instead, what happens? You get an encounter more anticlimactic than a fart in PT.
On a Sunday afternoon.
What you do in this final boss to end off a pretty great game is fly in a straight line, avoiding things in a very cramped tube, making movement pretty difficult, and spinning a cowardly Cortex 3 times before he randomly escapes to a gas hob. And that's literally it. He doesn't even attack you. I can't say any more about it. You can see how boring and lazy this fight is, and it's even more disappointing how it's at the end of the game.
You haven't seen the last of me, Crash Bandicoot!
Oh, I bloody hope so, because I want a better fight next time. Oh yeah, I got him good there. And for the last PS1 game of the list, despite this list being in no particular order at all, I actually think I have such a gripe with this last fight, and I hate it so much that I honestly think I saved the worst for me until last. Space Mama in the original Rayman. If you see my video on Rayman, you know how polarizing I find this game.
Half of this game is some of the most bright, colourful, original, charming and kick-ass 2D platforming I've ever played, and the other half is a cesspit of hate and unfair bullshit that isn't fun to play whatsoever.
And so I'm going to paint a picture for you on the typical Rayman player that isn't a master of the game. You get through the entire beginning up until World 4. It's a challenging if comfortable journey up until World 3, Blue Mountains, where some of the most cryptic and trial and error one-hit death bullshit sections start to surface. And that's when you start losing lives fast, especially once you're on World 4, Picture City. And by the way, every time you get a game over, you lose one of your 5 continues for the entire game, and after every single death, you restart the section with 3 hit points with the weakest attack to keep you going through another bullshit part you don't have a chance to learn without losing all of your lives quicker than before and losing another continue. By the way, after each continue, you only get an extra 3 lives to work with. If you're going to say that you can just find more lives and power-ups in the stage that you're stuck on, well, no, you can't, because you're stuck on it, and it gets close to impossible in these later stages, and you usually lose more lives just trying to get them, so forget about it. Anyway, you get to the end of World 4 after some of the hardest levels and barely any supplies, only to then begin the final boss of that world, Space Mama. Let's safely assume you die on your first attempt because it's so confusing for a first-timer, as you'll come to understand, so you restart with the default 3 hit points. Now let's go down the list on why this fight is a load of shit. It begins immediately with a flying thing that you need to duck under. If you didn't know to do that, 1 hit point gone. Following that, she parks her ass near the center of the stage, giving you no room to hit the only weak spot she has, the very tip top of her head. And sometimes you can hit it okay, and other times you don't, and it just bounces off. It makes no fucking sense. If you can't hit her 3 times or so before she reaches the end of the screen, which is very likely, especially as you're trying to find her weak spot when you're first playing the boss level, you lose another hit point, maybe even die by that point. If you don't die though, you've got 1 hit point left, so luckily her laser gun and flying is easy enough to predict and avoid. But after some time passes, she'll fly to the sky and start firing these pots at you. They're quick to fire at you, but I'd say still possible to avoid if you think on your toes. Then all of a sudden, you get the row section. You get 4 rows that you need to quickly dash to the clear ends of the stage with before they fire at you, and on the last one, you can't run because they're too close to the floor, and the only way that you can avoid the last row is by making sure that you run to the edge of the clear part of the last row and then make sure you're immediately facing the opposite direction, and as soon as that last row leaves the screen, you need to crawl the millisecond after they do leave, otherwise it's impossible. Look, how fair is that? And with that, assuming that you didn't die earlier trying to figure out where to hit her in the first place, 3 strikes and you're out. Try again. This time you remembered why you died in the first go, so you're okay, but you might still make a mistake. So let's just say you have 2 hit points left on your second attempt, and then you need to learn another section when you're being randomly fired different length laser blasts at different heights. And no, unlike the part with the pots where you just had to wait for the attack to end before you can hit her again, instead you actually have to hit the fucking washing machine tons of times in order to make it go away. But not the washing machine, the tiny little knob on the top of the washing machine. And again, sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. So assuming that you had any hit points left after figuring out that bullshit, watch out again, because if you manage to pass that point, out of nowhere the washing machine starts bouncing off towards you. So if you aren't ready for that, you're probably gonna die again. Oh, and for added sprinkles of awful, the same laser attack she's been doing since the beginning now tricks you and suddenly fires twice. Fucking hell, this is one of the worst bosses ever, and I'm not even exaggerating. I fucking hate it. And this footage you're seeing here is me beating her. I can do it just fine with 3 hit points because of how many damn times I've retried it for my Rayman video. And because of that, I can confidently say it's one of the most unfair trial and error and mechanically random fights I've ever played, and I have more fun gouging out black goo under my toenails. None of it makes any fucking sense, and it expects so much out of you, especially if you're stuck in a death cycle and constantly retrying with the same pitiful fist attack and 3 hit points, that if you can't do it within the first attempt after a perfect run of the tricky stage before it with the most health and best fist, you might as well just hit reset. Except if you didn't save before this encounter, you'll lose all of your progress if you reset, or if you lose all of your continues on that boss in the first place, you'll have to reset anyway. Fuck!
No, enough. I can't take any more awful bosses. That is enough, thank you. What do you think, though? Do you agree with some of my choices? Do you disagree with some of my choices? Do you think I should crawl up into the corner and starve myself to death? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. You might even have some bosses that I might have forgotten about, or that you had experienced, didn't like, and that I didn't include in this video. I don't know, I'm only one person, fucking hell. But until next time, if it's your birthday today or watching this video, happy frickin' birthday to you. And please remember to stay beautiful. Unlike these bosses. You don't want to be waking up looking like the bed of chaos.
Hello you, if you're watching this, you have great taste because you've decided to find out about this awesome website, chrono.gg/caddy, where every single 24 hours a brand new game goes up on the site for upwards of 90% off. Some of my favorite indie games of all time have been on the site, and if you head to the description at chrono.gg/caddy, you can grab them now. Bookmark the site and check it every day, and thanks for listening.